You chose him because you thought I had nothing.
Adrian, what are you talking about?
You never asked what I was building. Tonight, you'll find out who. Before you sign anything, what are you talking about? You should know who controls this company. Me.
The boardroom erupted in applause when my wife announced she was leaving me. Camille stood beside Marcus Vale, the billionaire investor who had just promised to rescue her family's dying medical device company. She looked directly at me. Adrian. I'm done carrying a man who has nothing to offer. Marcus smiled. Some men save companies. Others own them. The executives laughed. What they didn't know was that I had spent the previous 11 months secretly keeping Sterling Medical Technologies alive. I had renegotiated its debt, stopped a supplier collapse, recovered a stolen patent, and prevented the company from losing its biggest hospital contract. Camille knew I had been working late every night. She just never knew why. Then she removed her wedding ring. I'm choosing Marcus. I looked at her. Are you sure? She smiled. Completely. I nodded. Then I hope you enjoy what you've chosen. She walked away with the billionaire. But 30 minutes later, the emergency board meeting began. Victor Sterling entered carrying a sealed black envelope. Inside was the document nobody in that room had ever seen. The controlling ownership certificate of Sterling Medical Technologies. And when Victor opened it, my name was printed across the top. For 11 months, everyone inside Sterling Medical Technologies believed I was simply an outside restructuring consultant. That was exactly what I wanted them to believe. The company occupied a sprawling research campus outside Boston, Massachusetts. Unlike flashy technology companies, Sterling Medical Technologies had no celebrity executives or enormous social media presence. It built something much more important: advanced surgical navigation systems. For 30 years, Victor Sterling had built the company from a small laboratory into one of America's respected medical device manufacturers. But success had made the company comfortable. Too comfortable. By the time I entered the picture, Sterling Medical was bleeding money. 3 major suppliers were threatening to terminate contracts. A European competitor had filed a patent challenge. The company's largest hospital network was considering switching suppliers. And the bank had given Victor 90 days to restructure nearly $420 million in debt. Victor was proud. Too proud to admit how bad things had become. That's where I came in. My name was Adrian Cole. On paper, I was a corporate turnaround consultant. I arrived with an old black sedan, a modest apartment, and no assistant. Executives underestimated me immediately. That was useful. My wife Camille worked inside the company as vice president of strategic development. She believed her father had hired me because I was good at fixing financial problems. She never knew the real reason. I had been asked to help because of a private agreement signed years earlier. My grandfather had once partnered with Victor Sterling's father. Before either family became wealthy, they had created a private investment structure to fund medical innovation. When the original founders died, most of the arrangement disappeared from public records. One portion remained active, a voting trust, and I controlled it, but I had never used that control until Sterling Medical began collapsing. I could have simply walked into the company and announced who I was. Instead, I wanted to know why the company was failing. Within weeks, I discovered something disturbing. The losses weren't random. Someone was deliberately weakening the company. Supplier contracts had been rewritten. Insurance payments were delayed. Patent filings had mysteriously missed deadlines. And a major hospital contract had been allowed to expire without proper negotiation. Someone inside the company was sabotaging it. I told Elena Brooks, my attorney, everything. She studied the documents. Do you want me to expose them? Not yet. Why? Because whoever is doing this believes they're safe. And I want them to keep believing that. Elena smiled. You sound like your grandfather. I'll take that as a compliment. Meanwhile, Camille became increasingly frustrated with me. She saw me working late. She saw me attending emergency meetings. But she didn't see the results, because I deliberately kept my role behind the scenes. One night, she confronted me in our apartment. You've been working on my family's company for almost a year. I have. And we're still living like this. I looked around our modest apartment. I like our life. She shook her head. You like it. I don't. She laughed bitterly. You always say money doesn't matter. It doesn't. That's easy to say when you don't have any. I stared at her. She had no idea how wrong she was, but I didn't correct her. Then Marcus Vale appeared. He arrived at Sterling Medical during the worst week the company had ever experienced. He was 45, a billionaire investor. Magazine covers loved him. He owned private equity funds across 3 continents. He walked into the company with a team of lawyers and promised Victor something nobody else had offered: a $600 million emergency investment. Victor was interested. Camille was impressed. I was suspicious. Marcus didn't ask enough questions about the company's technology. He asked about control. That told me everything. I warned Victor privately, don't sign anything. He looked annoyed. Why? Because Marcus isn't trying to save Sterling Medical. Then what does he want? Your patents. Victor stared at me. That's ridiculous. Is it? I showed him 3 shell companies connected to Marcus's investment group. All 3 had recently purchased shares in companies competing directly with Sterling Medical. Victor didn't believe me. Camille did even less. She defended Marcus. You're jealous. I looked at her. Of him. Of his success. I almost laughed. I don't compete with people, Camille. That's your problem. 2 weeks later, Camille stopped coming home regularly. She said Marcus was helping negotiate the rescue deal. Then came expensive dinners, private events, late-night strategy sessions. Eventually, the rumors became impossible to ignore. But the betrayal wasn't what shocked me most. It was the timing. Marcus had entered the company exactly when the sabotage became worse. That couldn't be coincidence. I asked Elena to investigate. 3 days later, she called. We found something. What? Marcus isn't the mastermind. I went silent. Then who is? Someone inside the Sterling family. Elena sent me a secure file. Inside were internal communications between Marcus's investment team and a private email account. The account belonged to Daniel Sterling, Victor's younger brother. Daniel had served as Sterling Medical's chief financial officer for 17 years. He knew every weakness, every debt agreement, every supplier, every patent deadline, and every internal signature. He had been quietly selling confidential information to Marcus for almost 2 years. The sabotage suddenly made sense. Daniel intentionally allowed contracts to fail. He delayed negotiations. He redirected valuable engineers. He even encouraged lenders to demand early repayment. Then Marcus would arrive as the hero. He would inject money into a weakened company, and Daniel would receive a private equity stake after the takeover. But there was another name in the documents. Camille. I stared at it for several seconds. Elena quickly explained. Her name appears in communication chains. Does she know? We don't know. Find out. Camille had been forwarding internal schedules to Marcus. Not patents. Not financial records. Just meeting schedules and executive information. Still dangerous. I needed proof that she knew about the sabotage. Then Marcus made a mistake. He invited Camille to a private weekend retreat in Aspen. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. Elena's investigators obtained photographs of Marcus meeting Daniel privately. The 2 men were discussing the final takeover agreement. Camille was there, but she wasn't in the room. She was waiting outside. That detail mattered. She might have been involved, or she might have been deliberately kept unaware. I needed certainty. Meanwhile, Sterling Medical's situation became critical. The hospital contract expired. The stock price dropped. 200 employees received termination warnings. Victor finally broke. He called me into his office. Adrian. He looked exhausted. I failed. I sat across from him. No. I built this company. And you're still trying to save it. I don't know how. I placed a folder on his desk. Then let me do it. He looked at the folder. Inside were revised debt agreements, supplier commitments, a new hospital contract, and an emergency financing package. His eyes widened. Where did you get this? I negotiated them. You negotiated all of this? Yes. How? I smiled. That's my job. He stared at me for a long time. You saved us. I didn't answer, because he still didn't know how deeply I was connected to the company. The next morning, the largest hospital network in New England renewed its contract. Sterling Medical received an immediate $180 million order. The company survived. Employees celebrated. Victor called me a miracle worker. Camille barely noticed. She was with Marcus. Then came the night everything exploded. Sterling Medical hosted an emergency investor dinner at a historic Boston hotel. More than 70 executives attended. Marcus arrived with Camille. She wore a black evening dress. He wore a tailored tuxedo. I arrived alone. The room fell quiet when Marcus approached me. Adrian. Marcus. He smiled. I hear you saved another contract. I hear you're still trying to buy the company. Maybe we both know how this ends. I looked at him. Do we? He leaned closer. You should take your severance and walk away. I don't have a severance. Everyone has a price. Not everyone. He smiled. You're a stubborn man. I've been called worse. Then Camille approached. She didn't look at me. Adrian, can we talk? Of course. She led me toward a quiet corridor. I've made a decision. I already knew. I'm leaving. For Marcus. She nodded. Yes. Why? She took a breath. Because I want a future. I looked at her. You think I can't give you one? I've spent years waiting for you to become ambitious. You never asked what I was building. I shouldn't have to. She removed her wedding ring. I deserve someone who knows what he wants. I looked at the ring, then at her. You're sure? Yes. Then I won't stop you. She looked surprised. You aren't angry? I am. Then why aren't you fighting? Because I don't fight for people who have already decided to leave. She turned away. Marcus waited near the ballroom. He took her hand, and together they walked away. For the first time in 11 months, I stopped protecting her from the truth. I called Elena. Release the trust documents. All of them. All. Tonight. Tonight. She paused. You understand what that means? Yes. My secret was over. At 10:30 p.m., Victor Sterling entered the emergency boardroom. Every director was present. Daniel sat at the far end of the table. Marcus was there too. Camille stood beside him. Marcus began speaking. Sterling Medical needs new leadership. He placed a takeover proposal on the table. We can save this company. Daniel nodded. Victor looked exhausted. Then the boardroom doors opened. Elena walked in carrying a sealed black portfolio. Behind her, 2 trustees followed. Victor stood. What is this? Elena looked toward me. I entered the room. Marcus frowned. Adrian. I walked to the head of the table. Then Elena placed the portfolio in front of Victor. Mr. Sterling, before this agreement is signed, there is something you need to see. Victor opened the envelope. His face changed. He looked at the first page, then the second, then slowly raised his eyes toward me. Adrian. I nodded. Yes. Marcus stood. What is this? Victor couldn't answer. Elena did. The Sterling Mercer Founders Voting Trust. Silence. Marcus looked confused. What does that mean? Victor whispered the answer. It means Adrian controls the company. Camille froze. Daniel's face went white. Marcus stared at me. You're lying. I calmly replied. No. I've been the controlling trustee for almost 12 years. Nobody moved. The boardroom had become completely silent. Camille stared at me. You? I nodded. Me? She shook her head. How? Victor answered. His grandfather and my father created the trust. The original founders. After they died, control transferred through the family agreement. Camille looked at Victor. You knew. I knew there was a trust. I didn't know Adrian was the controlling trustee. Marcus suddenly laughed. This changes nothing. I looked at him. It changes everything. He slammed his hand against the table. You don't have enough capital to control Sterling Medical. I don't need capital. I pointed toward the trust documents. I have voting control. Marcus looked toward Daniel. Daniel said nothing. That was when Elena placed another folder on the table. There's more. She opened it. Bank transfers, shell companies, private emails, contract alterations. Daniel's face collapsed. Marcus immediately stood. This is fabricated. Elena smiled. We have forensic verification. Daniel looked at Victor. Victor. Victor didn't respond. Tell them. Victor's voice was quiet. Tell them what? Daniel swallowed. I can explain. You have 10 seconds. Daniel looked toward Marcus. Marcus stared back at him. The partnership was already dead. Daniel finally confessed. He had sabotaged the company. He had sold confidential information. He had helped Marcus manipulate debt negotiations. He believed the takeover would make him wealthy. Victor listened in disbelief. You destroyed your own family's company. Daniel lowered his head. I thought you were going to lose it anyway. So you helped them steal it? Daniel had no answer. Camille was crying. She looked at me. Did you know all along? Not everything. But you knew something. I suspected. And you still let me work here? You were good at your job. She shook her head. You could have told me. I could have. Why didn't you? I looked at her. Because I wanted to know whether you loved me. Or the future you thought I couldn't give you. She looked devastated. Marcus suddenly interrupted. This emotional nonsense is irrelevant. He grabbed his folder. I'm leaving. 2 security officers entered. Marcus stopped. What's this? Victor looked toward the door. You're not leaving with company documents. Marcus's face hardened. I have every legal right. Elena stepped forward. No. Your acquisition agreement was never executed. The board rejected it. Marcus looked at me. You planned this. No. You manipulated everything. I protected my family's company. Marcus stared at me. You think you've won? I smiled. I don't think. I know. The next morning, financial investigators arrived. Marcus's investment group was placed under investigation for securities violations. Daniel was removed as CFO. Several executives resigned. Sterling Medical's share price stabilized. Employees who had feared layoffs were brought back. The company didn't just survive. It began rebuilding. But there was one thing I still had to deal with. Camille. 3 days later, she asked to see me. We met in the empty research wing. She looked exhausted. I made a mistake. Yes. I thought Marcus was going to give me everything. He gave you promises. I know. She looked down. Why didn't you ever tell me who you were? Because I wanted you to see me without the title. She started crying. I loved you. I believe you did. Then why did you let me go? Because love isn't something you prove by forcing someone to stay. She wiped her eyes. Do you hate me? No. After everything? I don't hate you. Why? Because hatred would keep me connected to you. She nodded slowly. Then she removed her wedding ring. I don't deserve another chance. I didn't answer. She placed it on the table. I thought you were a man without a future. You were wrong. I know. Then she whispered. You were building my family's future while I was destroying ours. I looked at her. That's the part one won't forget. She cried quietly. Then she left. This time, I didn't follow. 6 months later, Sterling Medical launched its most important product. A robotic surgical navigation platform developed by engineers who had almost lost their jobs. The launch was held inside the company's Boston research campus. Hundreds of employees attended. Victor stood beside me. He looked older, but happier. He handed me a microphone. You should speak. I shook my head. It's your company. He smiled. Not anymore. I looked at him. He corrected himself. It's our legacy. I smiled. That meant more than ownership ever could. 1 year after the night my wife left me, Sterling Medical Technologies was worth more than it had been before the crisis. But the company looked completely different. We stopped chasing growth for the sake of headlines. We invested in research. Engineers received profit sharing. Junior scientists received scholarships. Employees who had almost been laid off were promoted into leadership positions. The research campus expanded. And Victor finally stepped away from daily management. One morning, he invited me onto the roof of the original laboratory. Boston stretched beneath us. I owe you an apology. I looked at him. For what? For believing you were only a consultant. I laughed. You weren't the only one. He smiled. Camille? I didn't answer. Victor understood. She was wrong. Yes. But she wasn't the only person who underestimated you. That's all right. He looked toward the city. What will you do now? Keep building. That's all. That's enough. Later that afternoon, Elena brought me the final ownership report. The founder's trust had increased substantially in value. Sterling Medical's patents were worth billions. The voting structure remained under my control. She looked at me. You could sell everything. I could. And disappear. I could. Why won't you? I looked through the glass wall toward the engineering floor. Hundreds of people were working. Scientists, engineers, technicians, researchers, people whose jobs had almost disappeared. People who had stayed because they believed the company could survive. Because my grandfather didn't build this so I could sell it. Elena smiled. Good answer. That evening I walked through the research laboratory alone. A young engineer stopped me. Mr. Cole? Yes. I just wanted to thank you. For what? For saving our jobs. I looked at him. You saved your own job. We almost lost everything. But you kept working. He smiled. So did you. I nodded. That was the truth. Camille eventually left Boston. She didn't return to Marcus. His empire collapsed after the investigation. She moved to Colorado and began working for a nonprofit focused on medical access. I heard about it through Victor. I never contacted her. Not because I was angry, because some chapters end quietly. Years later, I received a letter from her. There was no request, no apology, no attempt to reopen the marriage. Only one sentence. I finally learned that a person's worth isn't measured by what the world can see. I kept the letter, not because I wanted her back, because sometimes people deserve credit for finally understanding the truth. I never remarried. Not immediately, anyway. I focused on the company, on research, on the people who trusted me, and on the lesson my grandfather had left behind. He once told me, never announce your value. Build something so meaningful that eventually the truth announces itself. He was right. My wife left me for a billionaire because she believed I had nothing to offer. She didn't know I had been secretly saving her family's company. She didn't know I controlled the voting trust. She didn't know I had spent 11 months fighting behind the scenes to protect thousands of employees. And she certainly didn't know that when she walked away, she wasn't leaving a man without a future. She was walking away from the man who had already secured hers. But I didn't win because my name appeared on an ownership certificate. I won because I never needed to humiliate her in return. I could have exposed everything the moment she betrayed me. I could have destroyed Marcus. I could have embarrassed Camille in front of the entire board. Instead, I protected the company, protected the employees, protected the legacy, and walked away, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone regret losing you. It's realizing you no longer need them to regret it. Years later, the original Sterling laboratory still stood. The walls were older. The equipment was newer. The people had changed. But the mission remained. Build something that helps people. I stood beneath the old founder's photograph. My grandfather on one side, Victor's father on the other. Two men who had started with almost nothing. And somehow, their dream had survived. I looked at the photograph and smiled. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Elena. New valuation, $6.8 billion. I locked the phone. The number didn't matter. Not anymore. Because I had finally learned something money could never teach me. Your worth doesn't begin when someone recognizes it. It exists before they ever look closely enough to see it. My wife thought I had nothing. She was wrong. But the bigger lesson wasn't that I had something. It was that I had never needed to prove it. I walked back into the laboratory. The engineers were still working. The lights were still on. The company was still alive. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the hidden owner. I felt like what my grandfather always wanted me to become. A man who built something worth protecting.